Hey, our featured dish for this episode is titled From Godfather to Podfather. I'm Scott Harrell, Executive Director of Fresh Start Ministries. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by none other than the Podfather, the Godfather himself, Joe Cordovano. Joe is the co-founder of Fresh Start Ministries of Central Florida, a pastor, and a former executive director of this incredible organization. For the past 38 years, Joe, along with his wife, Kelly, has poured their hearts and soul into building Fresh Start from the ground up. And since Joe and the board entrusted me to carry the torch, he has finally taken a big step into retirement. We're thankful for that for them. But let's be honest, we're not going to let him get too far away. Joe remains a teacher in the program and is a dedicated board member as well. Same with Kelly. Today, we'll be diving into the origins of Fresh Start, the vision behind it, and the lessons learned along the way. And today, we're going to be able to talk in great detail with Joe Cordovano, the founder of Fresh Start Ministries. Thank you for tuning in. So let's get started. What was it that took you initially to Dunklin? Why did you decide to go there?
I was helping a guy out in a ministry down here called Firewind Ministries. It was a coffee house. His ministry, his thinking was, and it was great thinking, to have a place and bring the homeless population, back then we called them street people, give them a place they can come without any hassles, in from the cold or the air conditioning when it's hot, and then church people, and the church people were supposed to minister to the street people. And I first met him and he was on Orange Avenue, down not far from the hospital down there, Orlando Hospital. And then he moved to West Street. I think it was West Street. Can't remember the name of it. Yeah, maybe West Street. Anyway, it was 4 blocks west of Rosie O'Grady's.
Okay, sure. Down Church Street.
Yeah, Church Street, yeah. Right around there. And not to be racial or anything, but to give you an idea of what this looked like, if you took a 50-pound bag of raisins, black raisins, brown raisins, black raisins, I don't care what color raisins, and put about 6 or 7 white ones in there, that's exactly what it looked like. We were the only white people down in that area. And this guy had a real heart. And what happened was, we would minister, and I've seen people get healed. I've seen epileptics stop their seizures. I mean, stuff that you would never even, some people that had never seen it in a lifetime of serving the Lord. We saw it in 3 years that I was down there with them. But I also saw these guys would get straightened out. We'd help them. We'd try to help them get jobs and this and that. And then they would return back to the streets, do their thing, come back. And so I went to the founder, who was only a year older than I was in the Lord. And I said, listen, Craig, I said, I think I got a problem. I said, I think, and you have to understand, I was brought up in Catholicism. So I'm thinking I got to go to seminary or,
Sure.
something like that. I said, I got to go to counseling. I got to learn how to be a counselor. I said, because I don't think I'm counseling these guys correctly. They keep coming back. And in his infinite wisdom, he says, hey, man, he says, and that's how he talks. He says, hey, man, he says, I know just the place to send you. And so he sends me down to this, he gives me directions to go down to talk to these people in Okeechobee. And when Kelly and I went there, you have to understand, it was 7 miles one way from the hard road, from a paved road,
Yeah.
and 5 miles the other way from a paved road. This was in the middle of dairy country, cow country.
Right.
And we drive in there, and I'm like, what in the heck is this? And they made me go to the church. I had to go to church. I had to go to the classes, go to church. Then somewhere around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I got to talk to somebody. Well, what happened was, I guess we were such a hard case. The first guy I talked to was the rehab instructor, whom I knew from here in Orlando. He says, listen, Joe, he says, you're going to have to come back again. I'm going to have to get somebody else in on this. Then I met him and the discipleship guy. And then they said, they couldn't say, okay, we'll take, they said, no, you got to come back one more time. So I came back one more time, and then I met Mickey Evans. And Mickey Evans did not, he said, tell me your story. And so we told him our story, and he looked at us and he said, your marriage is a mess. And we're looking at each other, me and Kelly, like, is this guy lost his mind? He doesn't even know us. But he told us, he says, here's what's going on. He says, you two are both going to following the Lord, but you're doing it miles apart. He says, we got to get you to come together and do it together. And so Kelly and I left. They said, let us know what you want to do. And so we left, and on the way home, because we lived in Orlando, obviously, so we had a long drive.
Right.
And we just thought these people were crazy, and yet God told me I was supposed to go there. And I'm like, what the heck? And the thing is when I got home, because we had been gone for like a long weekend, because my dad was still in prison, but my mother lived in, and my grandmother lived, and the rest of my family all lived in Sebring, Florida. So we went there, and then from there we went down to Okeechobee on a Sunday, and then we came back to Orlando, and we're like, these people are crazy. I mean, what? And I said, and so I had been unemployed. When I got home, I had on my answering machine, I had 3 of the best jobs that I had ever had in my life that I could have had. 3 of them. And God just told me, you need to go to Okeechobee.
So you go through this entire program. I mean, you go through their training. Now you're at least trained and prepared to plant a new location, and so you founded Fresh Start Ministries of Central Florida in 1986, and it started where?
I asked Mickey, how do you get into ministry? He said, you go get a house and you put people in it. This is great. Sounds easy enough. Yeah. So we had gotten a $500 offering from the church there at Dunklin to send us out. We took that $500 and we had some money of our own, and we rented a house. And so in this house, it was a 4-bedroom house.
Okay.
So me and Kelly had the master room. I had my son and a daughter from my daughter from my first marriage in another room. They were still small enough they could share it. 1 bedroom we made into an office, and then we put 4 women. We started with women in this other bedroom, and I would go out and work every day, work in construction, come home at night. Kelly, and so we had this other woman helping us, and she slept on a pull-out couch in the office. That was her. So during the day it was the office, at night, to do intakes and stuff. And they did all that stuff. I went to work, and but then I would come home, and then I would do all the teaching, and then they would do all the counseling, obviously.
Right.
Because we didn't feel it was right for me to counsel women and, that kind of stuff. Not that I even understood women at that point. I mean, I had enough problems with the one I was married to, let alone 4 others that were drug addicts.
Yeah, right.
And, so it worked out real well. And then eventually, again, going back down to Dunklin, because I would go down periodically for like little retreats for myself.
Right.
And on the way back one day, God was very plainly, while I was driving back to Sebring, because we would always go to Sebring, and a lot of times Kelly and the kids would stay with my mom, and then I'd go down to Dunklin and do my thing down there and pray and all that stuff. And then and on the way back, I heard God telling me to open up a house for men. And I came back, and Kelly said, how'd it go? What'd God say? And I said, you might want to sit down. I don't think you're going to like what God said. And I said, God said to open up a house for women. And, of course, we didn't have 2 cents to rub together. And we didn't know how we were going to do it.
Right.
But we both agreed after some prayer that this is what God was saying. And so while we had the women's house, we started a men's house.
Right. Same house?
No.
Same location? Okay.
No, yes, same. We had, what had happened was we had ended up having, the women were in Maitland,
okay.
Here in the Orlando area, greater Orlando area, Maitland, and the men were in Winter Park.
Okay.
I kept them separate. Yeah. We went to church together, but I kept them separate. Even at church, they weren't allowed to sit with one another. Now, unfortunately, that didn't always work out. I did have 2 staff people end up getting married, and that kind of thing, and
Sure.
shenanigans going on. But it was, and then eventually we had to close down the women's house, not for lack of interest, but because we lost all our leadership, and Kelly and I, we had just moved out of living with the guys in the Winter Park house because we lived there.
Yeah.
And so we just moved out, and there was no way we were moving back in with with women.
Sure. So how big did the house with the guys get before you went, wait, we gotta move out of here? Yeah. I mean, we gotta really think about
so
the next level.
This house was an older house. It had, you could tell it basically had 3 additions put on it. There was the original house, which was 1, 2, 3 very small bedrooms, and then they made the garage into like a bedroom, but we made it into an office, so it was theoretically 4.
Right.
And then they made, you could tell there was another area they put onto it, and that was just basically a kitchen and bathrooms and nothing. And then there was another hall that they put these 3 huge bedrooms on. So we had, again, my son, who was smaller, my daughter from my first marriage, who was a few years older than him.
Right.
So but they were still able to sleep together. And then we had my middle son was just born.
Oh, man.
So we were in 1 bedroom in this hallway. We put up a makeshift door so the guys couldn't come back there because it had its own bathroom and everything. Okay. So we stayed back there, and that's where we lived. We started out with, the women lived in there first, and then we moved the women out and moved them to Maitland and put the men in there. And we lived in there for, I think, about 2 or 3 years.
No kidding.
Yeah, and then finally Kelly gave me the ultimatum. She says, either we move out or I'm moving out with the kids.
Is that right? Oh.
And I freaked out.
Just because it was too chaotic,
it was nuts.
Or it was growing.
It was.
More.
We had at that point. We had these. Okay, we had these 3 original bedrooms, small.
Yeah.
One was for a staff person, the house guy, so he had his own room. So that only gave me 2 other rooms. And then there was 1 room in this back hallway that we cordoned it off, and they were able to where we literally I fit 8 bunk beds in there. They were crazy. Oh. It was big. They still had plenty of room, but it was tight.
Yeah.
And so there was 8 in there, and then 4 in each of the other rooms. So that's 12 people we had running around on top of a house manager, plus my kids, plus me, plus Kelly.
Wow.
And so finally Kelly said, that's it, party over.
Yep.
We got to go get a house, rent, buy, I don't care what we do. And I was freaking out because we had no money. but God made a way, and we ended up buying our first house, and we moved out, and ended up, the men's program went from 12 people in there, about 12 people in there, to we were housing 22 guys in that house.
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, people were begging me to come in.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, I don't have any place. And guys would say, I'll sleep on the couch. So we had one area, which was a day area, and it was a dining room and a day. So we'd eat in there, and then we clean up, and then everybody'd sit in the couches, and I'd teach class.
Yeah.
At night. And I taught all the classes. And then eventually we were able to finish off. They had a carport, and we finished that off and made that into a big classroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of how we did it. But we had guys begging to sleep on the couch and stuff, and I have a good friend that even worked for me later on.
Yeah.
He slept on the couch for months.
Is that right?
And we wouldn't let him leave. So every morning he had to take his stuff and put it behind the couch. So because we were doing intakes in there.
Sure.
When people came, that was the only place we had to do an intake. So that's where we had to talk to him. And I mean, we had some of the strangest stuff. I mean, I had one guy tell me, and the guy that I was working with as a houseman, we were interviewing him, and he called us to go outside, and he said, I'm going to kick your rear ends. And this guy was about 5'1", and me and this other guy, we were pretty buff at the time. I mean, we were working out and stuff. And I looked at this my guy, and he looked at me, and we looked at this. I said, man, go outside and go talk to your wife. She was waiting outside. I said, go talk to your wife, and you better cool down, and if you come back in here, we're not putting up with that again. And I was a little rougher around the edges back then, but
so there's a lot of learning and really fine-tuning really what you developed over the years in those early stages.
Yeah.
I mean, how to deal with a drug addict, how to teach them, and so many things, I'm sure, just by trial and error.
Yeah.
You developed and started creating a program that you felt was becoming stronger and stronger because obviously by evidence of the growth that happened. So from there, you're thinking, okay, this has got to be word's getting out that you're developing some lives here into a positive result, and then you have to go to the next level. So you did move out. And we outgrew that house. I mean, it was a long story, but the guy that owned the house, he and his wife was a lawyer, but this guy was alcoholic. Mm-hmm. He anything that went wrong in the house. So for instance, they had copper piping that's how old the house was. Well, the house is 20 years old, and the copper piping is getting pitted and springing leaks. Sure. He
blamed the fact that we had all these guys living in there, and he knew we had all these guys living in there, but he blamed that fact so he wouldn't fix it. So we went. Shoot, we were about 8 years without a lease. We just went from month to month with this guy, and he'd come down, and the roof leaked. He blamed the fact that we had all these people living in it. I says, what does that have to do with anything? And so we would fix the roof, and we get donations, and we get up there and we do everything ourselves. We remodeled the bathrooms and redid the plumbing and all this stuff. But it was time to move out, and so I had a board. But that board was basically to pray over Kelly and I, and had really nothing to do with the program or anything like that. They didn't raise money. They didn't, I didn't have any idea what kind of board. Well, what happened was we had helped, and you had him on the show, Dr. Dunn. We had helped his son. He'd come through the program. And originally we asked Dr. Dunn's wife, Becky, to be on the board, because Dr. Dunn was on another board. And eventually she got off and he came on. And when he came on, he had enough sense about boards, and he was savvy enough business-wise, which I wasn't, to get me to understand, to get Kelly and I to understand that we needed a board that was functioning.
Right.
So we started to put together a board. We made some mistakes. One board tried to take me over. They decided they were going to make the thing into just a 12-step house, an Oxford house, they called it. And I said, back in the day, it was like, yeah, over my dead body, we're going to do that. And, I was reverting back to some of my old ways. I was telling Dr. Dunn, I said, you got to keep these guys away from me because I'm going to end up killing them. They're going to come up missing. But thank God he had his senses about him.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from Dr. Dunn, and we ended up getting a board, and it was a functioning board. And I learned so much from those guys on how to run a business. They were godly men, all different denominations, but godly men. And they would just these guys were slap out businessmen, and they knew how to run businesses and how to manage money, and so I listened to these guys, and so we had an understanding. They wouldn't necessarily tell me how to run the program because they didn't want to do that.
Sure.
As long as I listened to them when they gave me advice about what we should do as far as raising money and stuff like that, and
Sure.
and so we did, and we had board members on there. One of our board members was on there for 20 years and just passed away a few years ago. One other board member I just learned passed away, and he had been on there for about 15. Another one was on there for 12. I mean, I had guys on there, and there was no they didn't have to stay on. But they stayed on because they had a heart for what was going on.
Sure.
And they helped us grow. So, saying all that to say this, I get a phone call one day, and Dr. Dunn says, hey, are we still looking? At that time, I was looking for an apartment complex. I thought because it's multi-dwelling,
Sure.
and I was having some problems with zoning at the time. Having 22 guys in a house, they weren't real crazy about that idea.
I'm sure.
And so we were looking, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey, you want to look at this place?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I said, "I can be right over there, and give me about 20 minutes." Because we were in Winter Park. This place was in College Park, and I go to this. He says it's a mobile home trailer park. I said, okay, that can work. And so I go to this mobile home trailer park, but I went to the wrong one. And I'm thinking, wow, this place is really nice, but I don't see Dr. Dunn. I don't see the others, support guys. I don't see anybody. And so I called them up and I said, hey, where are you guys? I'm here. He says, no, we're standing right out here. Well, I had been in the wrong one. Well, I came to where this property is now. I'm telling you the truth. The people that were living here scared me.
Really?
Yeah, they scared me. These people were crazy looking people.
Yeah.
And this trailer park was about one step up from homeless. And they were walking around smoking dope, shooting up. I mean, they were doing whatever they wanted to do. Having prostitutes coming in and out. I mean, it was crazy. It was absolutely absurd.
Sodom and Gomorrah going on.
Yeah. And so the real estate woman says, would you like to see a trailer? I said, well, that's probably a good idea. I mean, I see the outsides, but yeah, I'd like to see it. So they said, fine. So you have to understand, at that time I was 265 pounds. we go to this woman's trailer. She knocks on the door. Can we come in? Yes, blah blah blah. I guess she had squared it all. So we go in and we walk in, and there's a Florida room, and that was. Then you walk up the steps, and there's a little kitchen and dining, and that wasn't too bad. And I said, well, where are the bedrooms? And she said, well, you got to go down that hall. Well, I couldn't fit down the hall I had to go sideways because I was too big. That's how small. And let me give you an idea. The newest trailer on this property was made in 1951. I was born in 1951. I knew exactly how old that trailer was. And that was the newest one. But what we did was we ended up taking it. We bought it, and the guy that owned it was a good Christian man. We didn't know that at the time, but he was, and he helped us out. He actually he sold it to us for less than he had an offer on it already, and we witnessed to him and stuff and told him what we wanted to do with it.
Wow!
And he was so behind it that he said, "I'll tell you what," He said, I really can't sell it to you for less. He says, but if you buy it for what this guy said, he says, I'll give you $10,000 back. And I thought, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
You're talking to me, man. And of course, Dr. Dunn is like, yeah, that's it, and I'm like, yo, Rick, man, this guy ain't going to be giving us no $10,000. Sure enough, man. We paid and we signed all the contracts and stuff.
Oh, way.
And this guy took us because we were up in one of the big high-rise buildings with his lawyers in downtown Orlando. It was like, man, their conference room was probably about 3,000 square feet. Okay. And I had secretaries, Mr. Cordovano, and I'm thinking, whoa, man! I could get used to it. Yeah, I could get used to this. Well, we left there, and he said, "Why don't you come with me, and we'll go right to the bank?" And he said, "I'll put the check in, and then I'll give you $10,000." And I'm still thinking, yeah, there ain't no way. Wow. Sure enough, man, he gave us a $10,000 check. Wow. Blew my mind. And we used that money to fix up all the trailers because they were useless to us. Sure. The way they were. Sure. I mean, these trailers were like, that old dark paneling, and plus they'd been smoking in there. I mean, it was nasty. Oh, so what we did was we took the two little bedrooms and made them into closets. Oh, is that right? Yeah, like walk-in closets, and put all the guys' dressers and stuff and hanging clothes in there, and then made we closed off. Most of the Florida rooms were closed off with jalousie windows. Yep. We bought air conditioners. We put air conditioners there and put beds in there and we would put 8 guys to a trailer. A unit, really? Yeah. So we went from 22 to 50 something in like within 6 months. No kidding. And I'm thinking, there's no way we're ever going to fill. And actually we went from that to probably about 40, and then I had a guy that was helping us, and I was complaining because we had all these people wanting to come in, and we had nowhere where to put them. And he says, I can make room. I says, there's no way. Mm-hmm. He says, let me just do it. I said, okay, and he reconfigured stuff. No kidding. and ended up putting all these people in there and stuff, and it was crazy. But that's how we did it. So what we did was, we took out all the kitchen area and we just put a microwave and all that stuff, left that up there, left the kitchenette so they had a kitchenette. Mm-hmm. And each trailer obviously had its own little yard. And so that's kind of how we started out.
So you used all of those units that were in the park?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. I had one, there was there was 3 structures on the property. One was a house that we couldn't get into because it was being rented out as part of our property. Mm-hmm. And then there was 2 structures, block structures. Okay. One we made into an office and meeting area, and the other one we made into an office for the secretary, and Kelly was in there.
Okay.
And then I took a trailer. I was in a trailer.
Okay.
So everybody at that point, I only had one other guy helping me. So
Right.
he had an office and all that, and so that's how we worked out. But other than that, we used every other trailer to put people in.
Wow. How long were you in the trailer park then before it was like, okay, it's time to
8 years.
upgrade?
8
So
years.
then you went from there to a hotel.
Yeah. So
You moved out, went into a
Yeah.
hotel so that you could level it
yeah,
and build the building that we're
Right.
sitting in right now.
because you got to remember, I had never built anything. I could go in a place and refurbish it and make it work, but we've never started from scratch.
Yeah.
So in my thinking, being naive as I was, I'm thinking, well, because there was trailers on each side of a street.
Yeah.
We had one little street going, and so I thought, okay, well, they can work on demolish these trailers, and I'll stuff all these people into these trailers.
Yeah.
And then when we're done with that, then we can move into the building.
Yeah.
And then they can demolish and build the rest. It didn't work like that. That's not exactly the way Orlando City people wanted it.
Yeah.
And we had to get out.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my God, where are we going to go? And we had again one of our board members said, listen, he says, I own this motel in Eatonville, and the guy's not really paying his mortgage. He says, I could probably put you in there and we could work out a deal. And so what we did was there was 12 units, I think. I can't even remember how many units. And we took over the office and 8 or 9 of those units.
Is that right?
Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, 9 units, because there was 3 units that we kept that he kept people in. And this was in downtown Eatonville. And again, bunch of white guys moving into a neighborhood that we had no business being in.
Yeah.
But we got along with everybody. I mean, they
Yeah.
tried to take advantage of us. And I'll be honest with you, that whole time we were there, we were there for almost 11 and a half months.
Is that right?
By the time we finally got the CO to move in back here. And in that 11 and a half months, I didn't lose not one man to those streets. In other words, they didn't go out and do dope. They didn't buy dope from anybody around there.
Wow. Yeah.
And but we had some crazy times, and maybe one day I could tell you all those stories. But
yeah.
I mean, some seriously nutso stuff going on over there.
I'm sure you did. Hey, are you interested in becoming a title sponsor of Addiction Kitchen? Reach out to us using the contact information below, and we'll be in touch. Plus, if you'd like to join us in helping others, consider donating just $20 a month at freshstartministries.com/donate. Some people even do it for 1 full year. Every bit makes a difference. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe, like, and share it on YouTube or Facebook. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll know when our next episode drops. We'd also love to hear from you. So drop your questions or comments below, and we'll do our best to address them in the future episodes.